RealAgriculture.com's coverage of NCBA 2012 in Nashville is brought to you by the Corn School. Visit us at cornschool.com and Haney Farms, the certified barley and corn seed for the silage yield you want. Let's wrap up finally with cool. So ruling was in our favor. NCBA has passed a resolution to not appeal.
Right.
American Farm Bureau has as well, as you mentioned.
Right.
What's going to happen?
Well, you know, some of the guys I've talked to here this week, both with NCBA and a lot of the state organizations, have all indicated that they will also write to USTR and encourage them not to appeal that. But I think the overall consensus is probably that USTR is going to appeal it. We've been, going through a bit of a process, and USTR, so the United States Trade Representative, which is kind of like the American version of DFATE. They're the trade negotiators. They defend United States policies at the WTO. They've been meeting with U.S.-based stakeholders since that ruling came out for the last couple of months, and trying to see if there's a consensus in the U.S. as to what a resolution might look like. Now, of course, the administration can only make regulatory changes. They can't make legislative changes. So part of the challenge in that whole conversation is our belief that the only real resolution can come through a legislative change. That's not something the administration can offer. So they've really found out in this stakeholder consultation that there isn't a whole lot of consensus of what they could do or should do. And even if they did the most ambitious thing, it's probably still not going to make us happy. So I think they've basically resigned themselves that they're going to go ahead and appeal it. But that said, we're gonna not lay down on this issue. If it goes to an appeal, maybe we have the opportunity to counter appeal a few things. And as good as the ruling was, maybe there's a couple things we could get even a little better in there.
So with some of the major U.S. farm groups that represent farmers and ranchers, if they don't want cool, who's really behind at this point pushing for it?
Right, and that's one of the things as we look forward through this whole process, that let's say they do an appeal, and the appeal is again against the United States, and that leads us down to the path of retaliation. We're paying attention to who are those other ones that stood in the way of resolving it, and there's the National Farmers Union. There's RCAF. RCAF is sort of not what they used to be, but they do still exist. And, so we're going to pay attention. And if it comes to the point where we have to recommend retaliatory tariffs, we're probably going to be wanting to look at products that the folks who opposed us represent, look at geographic areas and those sorts of things, and come up with a strategic retaliation list. Now, we certainly hope it's not going to get to that stage, and I think track records and history would indicate that at some point it will be resolved before it gets to the point of actually retaliating. But that said, you still have to talk about those options now to make sure that people are aware of those potential eventualities.
When you had some really impactful numbers in terms of here's what might happen if cool was to stay in place, and some of the effect it has on some of the things that are happening in the U.S.
Right, and that's why it comes back to why we need to talk about things like the $1 billion of U.S. beef exports to Canada in the context of what is in the United States' best interest, and why the attitude towards trade does start to change in the United States, that as they see that they're becoming an increasing beneficiary of trade and exports, and not just to Canada, but Mexico's part of this cool case too. Mexico's their #2 market. Does it really make a whole lot of sense to have an ongoing dispute with your 2 best customers? Because when you have that benefit, you also become vulnerable. And our hope is that U.S. producers would start to see that it actually is in their best interest to abide by the rules of trade agreements that they've entered into.